The tray slipped just enough to make the silverware tremble, and in that fragile second, Hannah knew her life was about to tip the same way. The dining hall glittered with chandeliers and hushed laughter, the kind of place where mistakes were remembered longer than kindness. And as the manager's face tightened with public irritation, Hannah felt every pair of eyes turn toward her thin uniform and tired hands. What if this happened to you, right in front of people who never had to count coins at night or choose between heat and groceries? Would you shrink and disappear, or would you still stand there hoping someone might see the truth of you? Hannah had been surviving on hope for years, not living, just surviving. She was 24, living in a cramped apartment in Ohio with peeling paint and a heater that worked only when it wanted to. Her mornings began before sunrise and ended long after dark, balancing double shifts at the upscale restaurant where she served guests who barely noticed her unless something went wrong. She carried grief quietly, the kind that did not announce itself. Her mother had passed away 2 years earlier, leaving Hannah with medical debt, memories of warm hands brushing her hair, and one small pendant that never left her neck. That pendant, old and worn, rested against her chest like a secret she didn't know how to tell. The firing happened swiftly and without mercy. The manager's disappointment was loud and final, echoing between the gold-trimmed walls as Hannah stood frozen, clutching the tray she no longer needed to carry. No one asked about the long hours or the nights she cried herself to sleep from exhaustion. No one asked what it cost her to keep showing up. She was escorted out past linen-covered tables, past crystal glasses filled with wine that cost more than her weekly groceries. Outside, the evening air felt heavier than the humiliation burning in her chest. She wondered how many people walked past her every day carrying invisible battles just as heavy, and whether anyone would ever notice. Inside the restaurant, among the guests who had watched her dismissal like background entertainment, sat a man named Michael. He was known in business magazines as a billionaire investor, a self-made figure admired for his sharp instincts and philanthropic speeches that sounded sincere but distant. He had come to the restaurant to celebrate a successful acquisition, yet something about the scene unsettled him. Perhaps it was the way Hannah held herself, not angry, not pleading, just quietly wounded. Perhaps it was the look of recognition in her eyes, the kind that came from learning early that life rarely gave second chances. Michael had not planned to intervene. He rarely involved himself in moments like this, preferring structured generosity over spontaneous emotion. But as Hannah turned to leave, the pendant slipped from beneath her collar, catching the light for a brief, unguarded moment. Michael's breath stopped. His world narrowed to that small, familiar shape swinging gently against her chest. He knew it. Not vaguely, not symbolically, but intimately, like a memory carved into bone. The room seemed to tilt as his past rushed forward without warning. Years earlier, long before wealth insulated him from pain, Michael had been a teenager growing up in a struggling neighborhood in Pennsylvania. His family had little, and his father had left early, leaving his mother to work 2 jobs while volunteering at a local church-run shelter. There had been a woman there named Margaret, gentle and firm, who wore that same pendant every day. She had once pressed it into Michael's trembling hands after a night he had nowhere to sleep, telling him through action rather than words that someone still believed in him. That woman had disappeared from his life without explanation, but the pendant had never left his memory. As Hannah stood outside the restaurant, fighting the urge to collapse onto the cold sidewalk, Michael followed. He moved without ceremony, without announcing who he was or why he felt compelled to speak. He noticed the way Hannah's shoulders were pulled inward, as if she were trying to protect herself from more than just the wind. When she looked at him, there was no expectation in her eyes, only exhaustion. Michael asked about the pendant, his voice unsteady despite his power. Hannah explained, not knowing why she trusted him, that it had belonged to her mother, that it was all she had left, and that her mother had once worked at a shelter before illness took everything else away. The realization struck Michael with physical force. The woman who had saved him without ever knowing the outcome had been Hannah's mother. The kindness that had redirected his entire life had quietly continued through this young woman standing before him, now broken by a system that had no patience for human fragility. Michael felt shame for every time he had spoken about compassion without practicing it in moments that mattered. He saw in Hannah the echo of a promise he had once made to himself, to never forget where he came from or who helped him get there. What followed was not a dramatic rescue or a sudden reversal of fortune, but something deeper and more lasting. Michael offered Hannah a job within one of his companies, not as charity, but as opportunity. He arranged for her education to be funded, for her debts to be cleared, and for her to have space to breathe again. More importantly, he listened. He listened as she spoke about her mother, about loneliness, about fear of failing again. In that listening, Hannah began to feel something unfamiliar and powerful taking root. Hope. Months passed, and Hannah's life changed slowly, realistically, with setbacks and learning curves. She worked hard, doubted herself often, and sometimes cried in the quiet safety of a stable home. Michael did not hover or control her future. He simply removed the barriers that had made survival her only option. Hannah grew into herself, discovering strengths she never had the luxury to explore before. She volunteered at shelters, inspired by her mother's legacy, wearing the pendant proudly as a symbol of endurance rather than loss. Years later, when Hannah stood on a small stage at a community center, speaking about second chances and unseen worth, Michael watched from the back of the room. He understood then that wealth meant nothing compared to the impact of noticing someone at the exact moment they felt invisible. If you were in Hannah's place, fired and forgotten, would you still believe the world could change in a heartbeat? If you were in Michael's place, would you recognize the quiet signs of humanity calling you to act? Before the story closes, take a moment and tell us in the comments what part of Hannah's journey stayed with you the most and why it mattered to you. And if this story touched your heart, reminded you of kindness, regret, or the power of a single moment to change a life, please like, comment, share, and subscribe so more stories like this can reach those who might need hope today.